Dr. Johanna Pagonis is the owner of the leadership consulting firm Sinogap Solutions. She has 20 years experience in leadership and organizational development gained throughout her professional and academic career. Her company specializes in working with organizations and developing employee engagement and leadership strategies that will contribute to a company's ability to continually grow and achieve its mission. Johanna is also the author of the newly released book, Choose to Be a Leader Others Would Want to Follow: How to Lead with Heart and Purpose, which grew out of her desire to support managers in learning how to become emotionally intelligent leaders that can achieve organizational success while inspiring and motivating others. Her goal for this book is that people, especially leaders in top ranks, will be motivated to create a workplace environment where managers are supported and encouraged to embrace their vulnerability. And Johanna explores the workplace as an enriched landscape for managerial learning and leadership development. And let me enable the screen share here. All right, good to go.
Okay, wonderful. Hello, everyone. I'm just going to, before I actually start to share my screen, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the book that Zach mentioned. It was newly released last year when I was going to present last year, so it actually came out in May. And the book grew from the research that came out of my PhD dissertation that really explored how do managers learn through everyday work. And so I'm going to be drawing from that research as we go through the presentation / workshop today. In a moment, I'll share what our discussion points will be. So let me just share my screen right now. Okay. There we go. Can you see the main screen?
It looks like it's showing the presenter view right now.
Okay, let me do it again. There we go. Now that should work.
Perfect.
Okay. Yes, excellent. Okay. It's kind of funny. It's been a while since I've actually done a presentation, so I'm just trying to get the hang of it. And I want to open the chat too, so I can see everyone's discussions and contributions, because it will be quite interactive. So before I go through the discussion points and then briefly lay out for you what the presentation / workshop experience will entail, I wanted to get to know you a little bit better. And so I'm curious to know how many of you are what we would call an individual contributor. So somebody who is primarily responsible for delivering on their own tasks and work responsibilities. And how many of you are a formal leader, meaning a manager or a supervisor? So you're primarily responsible for ensuring that other people have the skills that they need and permission to do their job and ensuring that they actually complete their work. So if you're an individual contributor, write A in the group chat. And if you're a formal leader, just go ahead and type in B, and that'll give me an opportunity to get a sense of who's in the room. Okay, so some A's and B's. So far, it looks like an even, Stephen kind of split between the two. All right. Now, although I'm going to be primarily focusing on how managers learn through everyday work so that they can become emotionally intelligent, the systems and processes that I'm going to be sharing with you are relevant and applicable to how everybody learns, whether you are an individual contributor or a formal leader. All right, so let's go over what we're going to be discussing today. And so I encourage you to go to the community chat or to download the handout that Zach's going to put into the group chat. It's just a workbook to help you, guide the learning and help you also. There's a spot where you can actually capture your thoughts and insights and contributions through today. One of the reasons why I have all of my presentations / workshops come with a workbook is because I also understand that as human beings, we're not always capable of transferring what we learn through experiences like this, a conference, to our workplace context. So having the opportunity to reflect on what we're learning and how it applies to our workplace context, our everyday job, can go a long way in helping ensure that you're able to transfer the knowledge that you gain to your workplace. And that workbook is a transfer of learning mechanism, if you will, to support that. Therefore, throughout the short time that we have together today, I'm going to be asking you to engage in some reflective activities, think and shares, just like Doug and Jeff did earlier. So you'll have a moment to think about an answer to a question I will pose. And then I encourage you to write your responses in the group chat. So have your keyboard at the ready, because I'll be asking you to contribute that way. And just like Jeff said, one of the worst experiences a presenter can have is when there's crickets. So I encourage you to write as much as you can and feel comfortable in doing so. And then I'm also going to be checking for understanding throughout. And so if you have a question related to one of the concepts that I'm talking about, I encourage you to write your question in the group chat, but there'll also be an opportunity to ask some questions that may be more generic or general at the end as well. All right, so our points of discussion, what are we going to be covering today? So throughout the presentation, my goal is that we can really make a strong case for managerial development. Just like in the previous presentation, one of the questions was, well, how do I make the case to senior managers that culture is important? And so what I'm hoping to do is make that case for you. So you have what you need, you have the information, you have real life examples that you can then bring to your senior managers to say, hey, this is something that we should consider. It can actually go a long way in nurturing or creating the kind of culture that we think is important for our organization. Next, we're going to talk about how do managers actually learn in the workplace. And this is where we'll go into a little bit of my PhD research, but I'm also going to talk a little bit about my own personal experiences of being a manager and why that drove me to wanting to go back to school to pursue a PhD after working in the field for over a decade or so. Then we're going to take a look at what I created, which is the SINOGAP Workplace Learning Framework, and how that framework or model can guide the design of workplace learning strategies that can equip and empower your managers with the tools and the confidence that they need to implement some of the things that Jeff and Doug talked about before. Like when we looked at culture in respect of relate, feel, and do, creating strong relationships. I'm just looking down at my notes here. Feelings around being compassionate and committed to others and the organization, and equipping people with the skills and the permission and the tools they need to do their job. You're going to see that some of the things that Jeff and Doug talked about will run really nicely through this whole presentation. And if anything, our presentations complement one another. And probably what Jason will talk about next I think there's just some nice consistency between the three. And probably, there was definitely a method to Zach's madness when he put us together, I think. Then we're going to look at, well, if we're going to examine how learning happens in the workplace, well, what are some of the barriers that exist in a workplace context and some of the enablers that can either support or, retract or take away from learning? And then we're going to look at a real life case study, like, although some of this is going to be theory, how do you actually apply it? Although I'm an academic, I'm a practitioner through and through, and had been working in the field and still do while before, during, and after my PhD. And then we're going to talk about simple strategies that you can implement if you want to support learning through everyday work that don't have to be as large and in-depth as the case study I will present to you. So this will be a think and share activity for those of you who are managers, or those of you who are individual contributors, but may have friends who are managers and perhaps they've shared their experiences with you. What I'd like you to do is to think about your early experiences when you first became a formal leader, supervisor, or manager. And I want you to think about a word or an image that encapsulates what that experience was like. And in a moment, I will show you an image that really represents my early experiences as a manager. So take just a few seconds to think about that, about 10 seconds. And then when you're ready, please write your responses in the group chat. So as you're thinking and writing, I'll mention that one of the reasons why I have it written here on the slide, how it all started, is because this is what actually propelled me and motivated me to go back to do my PhD, was the early experiences I had as a manager. Okay, some pressure, yeah. Exciting, well, that's good. Although exciting can be very stressful as well, as Shelley's saying. Yeah, I had no formal training. And I'll just see if there's another one or two that may come up before I show you my image. although I think probably people could relate to the pressure, overwhelming, stressful. Yeah, definitely exciting. Absolutely. Okay, I'll show you my image. This is what I experienced. It was a sink or swim moment in my life. And no joke, that's exactly how I felt. I started my first day on the job. I walked in. Nobody knew I was coming. The executive assistant was flustered and upset because she didn't know I was coming. They had no workspace allocated for me. So she had to find one on the fly. It didn't even have a keyboard. And then I was also tasked to come up with a budget within the first 2 weeks that I had started. I had no keyboard. I had no idea where to find information because no one was there to onboard me. I was literally on my own. And I had a team of 7 reporting to me. There was major interpersonal conflict between 2 people that was leading towards a formal grievance. And I felt totally overwhelmed. And I knew I was in over my head when one day on the way home from work, it was like within the first 3 months, I almost ran over a pedestrian. And in my book, I talk about this experience. And I thought, oh my God, is this the way that we develop our managers? I truly believe that managers are the linchpin to an organization's success. And Jeff and Doug talked about how they drive culture. They don't dictate it, but they drive it. And therefore, when we create these kind of learning experiences for our managers, how do we really give them the skills and the confidence that they need to achieve positive organizational outcomes? So that's why I decided to go back to school, because when I asked my colleagues about how their learning experiences were, they basically said they had the same experience. And so Jamie contributed to the group chat and said, our running joke is the only end is the deep end. And we don't have any floaties. Yeah, absolutely. So I came across a great article that Zenger and Folkman wrote about, and they talked about the 6 fatal flaws that can kill a leader's effectiveness. So when I went back to school to do my research around how do managers actually learn to become capable and competent leaders, I uncovered what managers learn. So that was my first research question. What are managers learning? And some of the competencies that came out of that research really aligned very nicely with Zenger and Folkman's research around the 6 fatal flaws. So this is another think and share. I would like you to take a moment and think about, what do you think the top fatal flaw was that if a manager is not equipped with the skills to be able to demonstrate this competency, it can really kill their effectiveness and therefore be detrimental to not only the culture of an organization, but their ability to create an exceptional client and employee experience. So about 10 seconds to think about that, and then I'll ask you to contribute it to the group chat. And then I'll share what the data was. And I strategically placed my think and share activity so I can have a sip of water. Okay, Shelley said building trust. Okay. Colin said interpersonal skills. Excellent. Is there anyone who would like to contribute? Anybody else for a reveal? Okay. So they interviewed 87,000 leaders, and the data came from 360 assessments where leaders from across the globe were evaluated on average by 13 other people. So the most important fatal flaw, the number one, was to be able to inspire and motivate others. And so if you can't build trusting relationships, like Shelley said, and you have no interpersonal skills, which speaks to your ability to develop relationships with others, it'll become very hard to inspire and motivate others. Some of the other fatal flaws was the ability to communicate powerfully, to invest in your own professional development while investing in the development of other people, like the people that are on your team, and also collaboration and teamwork. And so when you think back to the previous presentation, when they talked about trusting relationships and how we treat each other and compassion and commitment to the organization, it aligns well with Zenger and Folkman discovered through their research, but also what came out of my research as well. And so what I discovered is, what do managers learn that really does enable their or contribute to their effectiveness as a leader is what I call the 4 leadership competencies, or better known as the 4 domains of emotional intelligence. And so this is where we'll start to get into EI or EQ, the emotional quotient. So just a quick little poll. How many of you are familiar with the concept of emotional intelligence? So if you could write beginner, intermediate, or advanced, Johanna, move over, I could teach this workshop. I'd like to know what the level of knowledge is in the room. Intermediate, Lisa, thank you. Beginner, Colin. Jeremiah said intermediate, Zach said intermediate. Okay, great. Nicole, thank you very much. Okay, great. So a lot of what I'm going to share with you will be very familiar and make sense to you, and others may be some new knowledge that you'll gain from this. So the first 2 competencies or domains, self-awareness and self-management, speak to your ability to identify your emotions, your strengths, your weaknesses, and the ability to regulate your emotions to achieve a positive outcome. Now, I'm not saying that emotions are bad. We've kind of been developed or, to believe or programmed to believe emotions are bad. Emotions are wonderful. They make us who we are. They make us humble and they make us more approachable when we can emote in the workplace. But at the same time, we have to be able to say, oh, well, I kind of had a hard time, or maybe I had a bit of a moment there. I think we've all had that as formal leaders or individual contributors where you emote more than you wish you did. But can you reflect back on how that went? Did those emotions help you achieve the outcome you were looking for, or did it push you further away? And what could you do differently next time to be successful? That's really what the first 2 domains are. They focus on you, the self, the individual. The last 2 domains, social awareness and relationship management, speak to your ability to identify and relate to other people's emotions and to support other people so that they can leverage their emotions to also achieve a positive outcome. So social awareness is all about, do you understand the vision and purpose of the company you work for? Jeff and Doug talked about that previously, and it's great we know what our mission statement is, and there's a poster about it. But then how do you live and breathe those values, that vision, that mission, and how do you translate that so that the people on your team understand how they fit into the bigger picture so that they can be truly committed to the organization? The other thing is, so that's social awareness. Also, when we talk about diversity, equity, inclusion, really at the heart of that is compassion and empathy. Can you create a brave space where somebody can show up and share with you maybe their experiences of injustice and inequality, and you can listen without getting defensive? You can listen without judgment. That's really what social awareness is about. And last but not least, relationship management. Can you develop trusting relationships with others? Do you have people who trust you and will support you in your successes and your failures? And can you do the same for others as well? Can you contribute to the development of other people? So when you think back to what Zenger and Folkman said, communication, teamwork, collaboration, inspire and motivate, invest in your development and others, they really align very well with the 4 domains of emotional intelligence, and also what Jeff and Doug were talking about when it comes to relate, feel, and do as well. So that was the first research question I had. How do what do managers learn? The second question I wanted to uncover was, how are managers learning in the workplace? So this is going to be a think and share. One of the things that came out of my research was, although being emotionally intelligent is not only what managers need to learn to be effective leaders, it also enables their ability to learn. So this is the question: how come, or what do you think, what's the reason why emotional intelligence equips us better or gives us, helps us learn? What do you think? So I'll give you about 10 seconds to think about that. And when you're ready, if you can respond in the group chat. So the question again is, why does, or how does being emotionally intelligent contribute to your ability to learn? Okay, Annette, you can get feedback and act on it. Right. Receptiveness, yes. People will be more willing to give you feedback if they have a trusting relationship with you. They know they can be candid because there's a relationship of care between one another. And so they can be critically honest, but they can also tell you what your strengths are to help boost your confidence. Casey said it allows you to see different perspectives. Yeah, if you can demonstrate empathy and compassion and create brave spaces, you're more open to hearing from other people. If somebody then maybe has an idea or doesn't necessarily jive with yours or contradicts the direction you want to go into, you're more willing to listen to their perspective because of the trust that you have with one another. Absolutely. And don't forget self-awareness. I really truly believe in order to be an exceptional leader, it all starts with understanding thyself first. You have to know what your strengths are and develop confidence and appreciation for what I like to call a superpower. Know how to leverage that to achieve positive outcomes for your organization. But you also have to understand what you're not so good at, so that you can make an intentional effort to fill those gaps through targeted professional development and seeking feedback from others, as well as Annette said. I think we all know leaders who we've experienced that lack a lot of self-awareness and probably think they're great in certain aspects of their job that they're not, and they're not open to hearing feedback. Therefore, the more emotionally intelligent you are, the more agile, resilient, and capable you are of learning. Now, the next thing I wanted to also uncover was, and in a moment, I'll show you my workplace learning framework, which will unveil the workplace activities that we engage in every day that contribute to our ability to learn or contribute to our learning. But there are also barriers and enablers. And so the next slide after the workplace learning framework will also look at what some of those barriers and enablers are. And that's where we're going to start talking about systems. Because, it's great to focus on training, but then how do you leverage the systems through everyday work to ensure that learning is happening continuously? All right, so this is the CINOGAP Workplace Learning Framework. This was my contribution to the scholarly world, but I also designed it because what we were doing in my organization, so when I was doing my PhD, I worked full-time as a manager throughout. And one of the things that we were doing, and I think maybe one of the reasons why I completed my PhD in rocket time, I did it in 4 years while working full-time, was because I took all of the materials, the information, the research that I was collecting and all the experiences I was gaining through that academic experience and an opportunity, and I applied it right to my workplace. My team was responsible for the professional development of supervisors and managers across a very large, complex government organization that had 7,000 people in it. And we had hundreds of supervisors and managers. And so we had identified that it was critical that we needed to equip them with the confidence and capability to be a better leader. And so we use this workplace learning framework to guide the design of a workplace learning strategy. So before I get into it, I'm going to give you a moment to just process this image, and I'll ask you to, I'll draw your attention first to the inner circle, take a look at what's in there, and then expand your focus to the two outer rings. I'll give you about 10 seconds for that. And then I'll start to explain it. And then I'll check for understanding before we move on to enablers and barriers as well. And I'm just reading Don's comment. Gives you the flexibility to look at the abundance of people and resources. Very well said. Nicole contributed to, and she said, you don't learn if you assume you already know. You have to be vulnerable and seek to understand. My participants said this. One guy gave me an example. A lot of my participants were in law enforcement. And one of my participants said that there was a major incident that happened in the correctional facility that he was working in. He was a new supervisor. He had no clue what to do. He called for every available staff to come to the emergency call. And he realized after that was the wrong thing to do. The next day at the debriefing session, he said he was absolutely embarrassed. He had to show up and say something to these people to debrief the situation that happened the day before. And he said, this is what he did. He went up there and he goes, I'm just going to put it all out in the open. He goes, I screwed up. I don't think that was the best thing to do or the best way to approach it. I learned from that experience. This is what I learned. This is what I'll do differently. And now I'd like to get your input on that. And he said, oh my God, he was so embarrassed. But people came up to him and said, Thank you. It's nice to know that if you're okay screwing up, that I can do that too. That went a long way in creating a very resilient and agile culture within that facility. So although leaders can't dictate, they can drive the culture through their behaviors. All right, so let's start explaining what this framework is. So when I go into the case study in a moment, I'm going to reference back to this framework, this model, to show you how it guided the design of our workplace learning strategy. So if I draw your attention to the middle of the circle, the blue, you'll see a continuum, which I call a continuum of informal workplace learning. So if you look to the right, where you'll see 100%, and underneath that, you'll see deliberate learning. So these are activities that we engage in through everyday work that are for the purpose, the intentional sole purpose of learning. So when you're at work, you may be engaging in a self-paced, on-demand online course. You know you're doing that course, and a lot of our mandatory courses are like that. You know you're doing that course because you have to learn something new, and then you have to demonstrate your knowledge through a formal assessment or quiz at the end. Even what you're doing today, the conference, is a formal learning opportunity. You know you're attending today because you're hoping you're going to get some new pieces of knowledge that you can then maybe leverage and use in your workplace environment. So you're 100% consciously aware that learning is occurring. If you look on the other side of the continuum, on the left-hand side where it's in the gold arrow, which says 100% implicit learning or tacit learning, these are activities you engage in through everyday work, but you have no clue that you're actually learning from these experiences. Like, we collaborate with people every day. We solve problems, we consult, we learn through the job, but we're not always aware how and what we are learning. Whereas in the middle of the continuum where it says 50%, it's called reactive learning. Sometimes we're aware that we learn through these activities, and other times we're not. So for example, you're working on a project. There's a piece of information that you absolutely need before you can make a decision or move forward with the project. You actually seek out somebody who has access to that information, or you try to find it maybe through a Google search or looking through the information that you have access to through your company systems. You know you're doing that because there's information that you need, and you're going to be learning something through that, which will better inform you to make a decision how to move forward. But other times, we may not be aware of our learning. Acting position speaks to replacement positions. Let's say a manager has left to go to another opportunity or to another area of the company. There's a vacancy. You need to fill it. And so you have somebody temporarily fill that position until you can run a formal competitive recruitment process. The individual in that position is learning a lot. They're learning what the position entails. They're learning what they like about the job, what they don't like so much about the job. They're learning about who's who they can go to, who are the decision makers, and so on and so on. These are opportunities of learning, but we don't always appreciate that I am going to be learning something that I didn't have or know before when I enter into these temporary acting positions. So that's how we learn in terms of through everyday work. When you look at the outer two circles, so obviously the other circle in gold is emotional intelligence. We talked about how emotional intelligence enables our learning. So I'll draw your attention now to the final circle, which is relationships. There are two ways, if I could distill, like one of my expertise is in how human beings learn. My previous experience was I was an instructional designer, and I got to travel the world and teach other instructional designers how to design exceptional learning experiences for primarily for adults. And one of the things that I learned was one of the ways that we do learn is not only through information that comes at us from an instructor, but it's our ability to think and reflect what we're learning and how it applies to the workplace. That's why I'm periodically stopping and doing think and share activities, because I'm hoping these reflective exercises will get you to start thinking about your workplace context and how some of the concepts we're learning apply to your real life world. But we learn in another critical way. We learn with and through others. When we talk about being resilient and developing confidence, although some of these are individual constructs and come from within us, what really helps us develop confidence and become resilient and bounce back from adversity are the relationships we have with others. That previous example I gave of that correctional peace officer who was a manager, when he said in a very vulnerable way, I screwed up, people didn't come up to him and make fun of him and tell him what a loser he was. They said, thank you for being that role model. I have like so much appreciation and respect for you. And it went a long way in developing more solid relationships with other people that he worked with. That went a long way in building his confidence and made him realize that that wasn't a bad thing. That was a great thing. So the relationships we have with our peers, our supervisors, mentors, coaches really enable our ability to learn. Every participant in my research study said they had a mentor, somebody who had their back and supported them through their successes, through their failures as much as they did in their successes. Where do you find the workbook? Sorry, hi, Shelly. Zach, can you just maybe upload it again into the chat? But if you go to the community board, where you actually, because you could actually log on to the presentations through the community board. If you go back to the community board, I posted not only the workbook, but I also posted the PowerPoint slides too. One of the things I want to draw your attention to, the workbook on page 4 is where you'll find the workplace learning framework. I basically covered a large portion of what it is in a very short period of time. But if you want more information about the model, you can go to the link on the bottom of page 4 in your workbook. And there's a blog that I wrote that really explains this model / framework in so much more depth. Thank you, Zach. All right, so now we know how managers learn through everyday work. Before I go into the enablers and the barriers, I want to just pause and check for understanding while I take a strategic sip of water. Are there any questions about specific to this? Maybe there's something that isn't clear that I can clarify. And like I said, I'll show you how we can actually implement this or use this or leverage this to develop a workplace learning strategy. So if that's one of your questions, just hold on. And I hope that will become a lot more apparent after I have that. I talk about the case study. So I don't see any questions coming up, but if it's because you're feverishly typing, just continue to type the question and we'll get to that. I'll just continue on to the barriers and enablers. And this is a think and share. Okay. So Fuller and Unwin are workplace learning researchers, and they developed a theory to categorize barriers and opportunities to learning in the workplace that they termed expansive, which are the enablers, or restrictive, which are the barriers. And so what I want you to think about is we're going to do a speed think and share. So I'm going to give you about 15 seconds to think about enablers. This is where I want you to think about your workplace. What are some of the systems, activities, processes, whatever that exist in your workplace that enable people's ability to learn through everyday work? So I'll give you 15 seconds, brainstorm as many enablers as you can. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so if you're ready, start putting it in the chat. Thank you. Easy and open access to communication with anyone. Yeah, like there isn't like, oh, I worked in a company where if you wanted to speak to the CEO, you need to go through 5 people to get to her. Can you imagine 5 people? I'd give up after the first. Culture that allows for questions to be asked. Yeah, no dumb questions. I won't belittle you if you ask a question. You know, one of the reasons why I had a sink and swim experience, I feel like I was drowning. There was nobody I could ask questions to. You know, in terms of where do I find the information that I need to develop a budget of $250,000? How do I manage this interpersonal conflict so it doesn't go to a formal grievance? I was literally alone. Nicole said they're offered new challenges with autonomy. Thank you. Nicole, you said something else in the previous workshop. You said agile scrum teams, cross-functional teams. I'm going to talk about how that's an enabler too. Expectations of learning new skills. Not stay in your lane. Yeah, the permission. You know, we talk about empowering people. Empowering really means, you know, or the way I would define it is, do they have the knowledge, the skills? Do they have the tools to do their job? And do you give them their permission? There have been some workplaces that I've experienced where you were not encouraged to speak to others because everything we did was on the down low. We didn't want anybody else to know what we were doing, which really made it very hard for us to be agile and to ensure that what we did benefit not just my immediate team, everyone across the organization, and our customers too. Human work said, know how my work contributes to the big picture. Autonomy is vital and creates trust. Yes. Okay. So what about barriers? So 15 seconds, think about barriers and then put it in the group chat. And then I'll compare my answers to yours, and they're very similar. And there's a couple new things that you may not have considered. And I should say, if you have the workbook, the answers I think are on page 5, but I mean, don't look at the page at page 5, just, brainstorm on your own. So we have a few more seconds. Whenever you're ready, just go ahead and put your answers in the group chat in regards to what you think some barriers are. Okay, so while people are still thinking and writing, why don't I show you the enablers? Okay, access to mentors, access to people. So if you're going to, like Nicole said, learn new skills, you may need somebody to talk to bounce ideas off of, like around how that's going. Another one is participation in special committees and stretch assignments. So when we talked about agile teams, cross-functional teams, there's a lot of learning that happens. Remember when we talked about consulting with others, asking questions, problem solving, that was at the center of the workplace learning framework? You get loads of that when you work on a cross-functional team or you've been tasked with a stretch assignment. There are a lot of things that you may not have encountered. Like, for example, how do you talk to somebody and influence somebody to deliver on a aspect of a project that really isn't your responsibility, but is impacting you? How do you do that? You get that experience by working on cross-functional teams and or stretch assignments. The other one was participation in social activities. So I worked in a male-dominated industry, and there were times where I would come into the office and none of the guys were there, just the women. And I'd ask, where are all the guys? They're at a golf tournament. Oh, we weren't invited? No, we weren't. Oh, okay, which like sucked. And then they would come back, and a month later, one of my male colleagues got a promotion. Oh, I thought, well, I could have been eligible for that promotion. I didn't even know it was happening. How did you find out about it? Through the golf tournament. Oh, the one that we weren't invited to. Okay, so social activities really, like, I mean, a lot of the knowledge that gets shared between people in a company happens a lot through social activities, the golf tournaments, the lunches, the dinners, the beer and wings, right? A lot of the learning happens when you go to a live conference, not necessarily only through the workshops, but breakfast, lunch. How about after dinner, like when we go to dinner together? So don't underestimate the power of social activities and making sure that they're equitable. And the same thing with acting temporary positions. Do you tap somebody on the shoulder, or do you try to have somewhat of an informal process, but a process nonetheless, where everyone feels like they have the opportunity to apply for that presentation, and not only because they attended the golf tournament. And slower paced work environments. Oops, sorry about that. That kind of got hidden under that part of the slide, but if you drink out of a fire hose or you give your leaders that experience, it's very hard for them to find the time to reflect on what they're learning, what they could do better next time, and also seeking out feedback or asking questions from others, because their focus is so narrow that they have the blinders on. They're just trying to survive another day. Okay, so let's see what else we have here. Opposite of what I said before. Thank you, Nicole. Colin, too busy to devote time to learning. Yes, which speaks to the last point I talked about. Agree with the last one. Yeah, so I'll show you quickly the barriers. It's the antithesis. It's the opposite of the enablers, right? And so when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, they say diversity is no longer an option, it's the reality. Although, I think it was Doug that talked about there are some companies that should look for people to add to their culture, not just fit into it. Inclusion is a choice, and equity talks about the systems we have in place. And are they accessible to everybody? or only to a certain group or population of our company. So when you're going to think about a workplace learning framework or strategy, be thinking of all of these barriers and think about, well, which ones do actually exist? Why do they exist? And how do we turn these barriers into enablers? All right. Now we're going to get to the case study. So as we approach, we're getting closer to the end of our presentation. So this is where I wanted to show you a real life example of how do you take all of this and actually turn it into a workplace learning strategy. This case study is big. There are a lot of moving parts to it. I want to preface it by saying you don't need this level of detail and resources to do something like to have a workplace learning framework. The last slide, or the second to last slide, is really basic things, mechanisms, things that happen in everyday work that you can leverage very easily, small things that you can do to have a big impact on how your managers learn and enabling them to become more emotionally intelligent. All right, so this was in the organization, the government organization I worked for that had 7,000 people. We wanted to design a supervisor and manager development program to equip them with the confidence and the skills they needed to become emotionally intelligent and to not have those 6 fatal flaws, right? To be very efficient, capable within the fatal flaws that Zenger and Folkman talked about, so they wouldn't be fatal flaws. We focused on supervisors and managers because they had very similar duties. There were some challenges, or I'll say perceived challenges, because our supervisors were part of a union. And so they were unionized, managers were not unionized, and there was this perception of us versus them, non-management and non-union and management. Non-union, which is management, and unionized employees. And so that was a bit of a barrier that my team and I had to work through with upper executives who were a part of this whole process right from the beginning. That was another thing. When you make the case for managerial learning and development that extends beyond just training, you have to ensure that they're a part of the process. It's just good change management principles. Make them advocates, make them enablers, ensure that if they have questions about anything along the way, they can ask it. But basically you're ensuring that they understand and support what you're doing so that they can deliver those concrete, consistent messages throughout the organization. So when we presented this opportunity to our supervisors and managers, people were committed to participate. All right, so the first thing that we needed to do is, one of the reasons why training fails is because we don't actually ensure that the training is evidence-based. We don't always conduct research to truly understand what the current state is, and then design the learning experience to bridge people from the current state to the ideal state, so that learning and performance are intricately linked. We don't always do that. And we always focus on outputs like, we had 100 people attend this training course. Isn't that success? No, it's not a measurement of success. A measurement of success is, how did people's behavior and performance change for the better as a result of this training opportunity? So we wanted to understand what the challenges were that people were facing so that we could bridge them from the current state to the ideal state. So we had access to employee engagement survey data. We also did focus groups, and we did interviews from frontline entry-level positions all the way to senior managers and executives to understand what was working well, what wasn't. And this is what came out. And you'll see it aligns with what Zenger and Folkman talked about, and aligns with, the lack of emotional intelligence that, or the ability to develop emotional intelligence. So communication was one of the top things. Managers, supervisors were perceived as having a difficult time in articulating the roles and responsibilities to their employees, let alone understanding their own roles and responsibilities. Therefore, they were reluctant to develop relationships with people because they lacked that confidence, and they didn't know how to have professional relationships with people that really instilled trust and care, especially because we were a unionized environment. There were some challenges around that. So understanding the collective agreement also came up. And because they couldn't, or were struggling to develop trusting relationships and bonds with other people, and truly ensuring that communication was flowing between them and employees, their own commitment to the organization was not necessarily strong or there, and therefore they couldn't instill that commitment in their employees. So then we understood what the current state was. So then we could design a workplace learning strategy that bridged them to the ideal state. So initially we had 40 participants. as I mentioned, a blend of supervisors and managers with 3 direct reports. We wanted to focus on equipping people who had direct reports first before we opened it up to other people as well. It was a 6-month program, so there were a lot of moving parts to this, as you'll see in a moment. Therefore, you had to be willing to participate through the whole thing. No shows, not allowed. Because content build upon each other. So what you learned in the first workshop and the concepts build throughout the whole experience. You couldn't decide, I think I'm going to just attend workshop 3 out of 5. Maybe I'll attend number 2. Maybe I'll go to the last one. No, you had to commit to the whole thing. Therefore, right from the start, we had 5 people drop out. We had an orientation session with all participants and their supervisors so that the supervisors could support the participants through this experience. And therefore we had 5 people drop out. We had no issues with that. We encouraged them to sign up for the next iteration, but the 35 that were in the program stayed. We knew that there would be moments of life happens and you can't show up, but we had contingency plans for that. Okay, now we're going to get into how the program looked like. So if you turn to, because there's a lot of content, I'm not going to be able to cover it all in the workshop. If you turn to page 6 in your workbook, I actually list out what the workshops were, what was the topics of each workshop, and a little bit more about the blended design and format as well, and what the results were. But I'll go through it now as a high level. So it was blended. We didn't only want training because we knew training is a good start, but people do have a hard time understanding how to apply the things that they're learning. So we blended it with coaching sessions. And so team coaching and individual coaching sessions. So what each individual participant did is after the orientation session, they met with a coach and they talked about their vision of an ideal leader. And then they had to reflect on where are they currently at in attaining that vision. And then they developed an action plan that was really like a SMART goal to help them develop a plan, a concrete plan of how they were going to get from their ideal state, from their current state, I should say, to their ideal state of that vision of that authentic leader. So they had one coaching session, one-on-one at the beginning, and then they had one at the end where they could then talk about their whole experience through this 6 months and where did they feel like they were at now and what were the next steps for them. As I mentioned, there was an orientation session with participants and their supervisors. There were 5 workshops that focused on the areas of growth I just talked about with different time slots to accommodate people's schedules. And there were 5 team coaching circles. So you would attend a workshop. The first workshop was on emotional intelligence. And then as a participant, you had to write in your workbook what you took away from it and how you were going to apply it. Then you had a couple of weeks to apply what you learned. And then you would attend your coaching circle that was facilitated by a coach to then talk about your real life experience in the workplace, how you applied some of that, one of the goals you identified in regards to developing your emotional intelligence. And then you had to talk about in your coaching circle, because these were very intimate moments of vulnerability. We wanted to ensure there was consistency between each coaching circle. So for example, if I was a participant, I attended a coaching circle with 3 other people, and those 3 other people were along the whole 6-month journey with me. And so we developed trust. We got to practice care and candor. We got to practice how to have a coaching conversation where as a supervisor, I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to know how to ask powerful questions to enable others to find solutions. Participants in the coaching circles not only got to think about and talk about how they applied what they learned, but how it went when they made mistakes, when it didn't work out so well, when they got success out of an experience, and they got to share their challenges and their successes and celebrate that with one another through the experience of the coaching circles. So when you go back to this, as you can see in the inner circle is when we wanted them to think about these workplace activities that they could apply some of their new learnings within. We encouraged reflection because not all experiences lend themselves to learning. It's when we have the ability to reflect on what we learned, what went well and what didn't, that makes it learning. But we also ensured that through the coaching circles and the cohort that they were connecting with other people, where they could flex their emotional intelligence muscles and feel like they had support from peers and a coach. We also encouraged them to find mentors that could support them through this process. And their supervisors were tasked also with having regular conversations with their employee throughout, so they could see their action plan and also encourage them and support them in achieving the goals that they identified to get them to their ideal state of that vision of an authentic leader. I'm just going to pause temporarily before I get into the results. I want to see if there are any questions. Thank you, Nicole. Yeah, I agree with not focusing on output. What were some ways you evaluated behavioral change outcome measurements, especially from an employee perspective? Yeah, okay, let's get to the results. And hopefully this will answer your question. I'm not able to share all the results with you. I'm gonna share the highlights. So what we did is we actually designed an evaluation framework that we didn't think about evaluation at the end. We designed the evaluation methodology at the beginning. And so we actually checked for results throughout the program. And we did that through the coaching circles. So we had some of the instructional designers present actually in the coaching circles so they could capture some of the data. All of this was explained to the participants. We said this was a pilot. So part of their agreement to participate was that they knew we'd be collecting data throughout, but everything would be anonymous and confidential. And they agreed and signed off on that. So we were able to collect data, testimonials, stories from people throughout the whole 6-month program about what was working and what wasn't. So that was one way we collected data. We also did a focus group with the participants again at the end, which was a summative evaluation to get their thoughts on how it went. And we also did a focus group with their supervisors. We wanted to see from their supervisors, what did you observe? They think they learned X, Y, and Z. What do you think they learned? What did you see as a benefit of them going through this program? One of the things that came out of the results was the supervisor said, my direct reports are learning skills I don't even have. I want to learn the coach approach. I want to develop my emotional intelligence. Can you have some courses or workshops you can offer to the supervisors so we're better equipped to support our direct reports? So we designed that to happen for the second iteration. So that was powerful that they shared that with us. It's another reason why training sometimes fails. You develop a new skill set or you acquire new knowledge your supervisor doesn't have, and therefore they can't support you in applying that in the workplace. So number one, what really came out was how more self-aware they were of how their emotions and their thinking and their thoughts influence their behavior towards others, for better and for worse. They understood and appreciated the power of communication and ensuring that communication was flowing between them and their direct reports, which contributed to the increased confidence that they had for themselves and their direct reports. And therefore, direct reports felt a bit more committed to others that they were working with and to the organization. Which was really exciting. And supervisors validated that through the focus group. Anecdotally, one of the pieces of feedback I got, which was totally haphazard, wasn't even intentional. I was in a social event related to work, and I could hear somebody speaking saying, hey, my boss just is going through this program and I'm seeing a big change in him. I hope they keep doing this program because I feel a lot more appreciated and I like coming to work a lot more. And I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but I was like, that was so validating. I'm like, when you hear feedback like that, you're like, wow, okay, this is working. We need to continue doing this. Okay. So you're like, okay, Johanna, wow, that's a lot. And I'll be honest, like we were a small team. There was myself and I had 2 instructional designers that designed this and developed this. And we leveraged resources from other areas. We had a research team that did a lot of the research and had done some of it previously, like through the employee engagement survey. So we leveraged what data we had to inform the design. And to be honest, we did actually contract some coaches to help us. And we also, what we did too, is we identified individuals who were going through a coaching program through the organization, and we brought them in to become our coaches. So we said, if you're learning how to become a coach, let's ensure that there's a good return on investment. You're going to use your coaching skills to support this program. And it doesn't matter whether you work for this work area or not, we want you. And so there was agreement across the organization that people could participate in that. Now, if you turn to page 7 in your workbook, there are 4 strategies that you can leverage to increase learning happening through everyday work, informal learning in your workplace. So one of them is, do you have an onboarding program for your managers? Is it just entry-level positions? Or when you identify somebody before they get promoted or even after they're promoted, you have some kind of an onboarding process for them that can help structure maybe the flow of work and can give them access to their supervisor and mentors so that they can ask questions. Oh, Lisa, can the non-supervisor direct reports get an abridged view of what the training was? And could this be helpful? You know what, they could have. Yes, they absolutely could have. We didn't actually think about the direct reports, but I think the next step for us would have been, how do we support people in developing their capabilities and potential to become leaders? And how can we leverage some of this to enable emerging leaders in developing that competence and that confidence? And how do we actually just promote this program across the whole organization so people are aware that this is happening and that this is driving our culture? I hope that answers your question, Lisa. Okay, so for example, yeah, structured onboarding is one way to do that. Another way is maximizing mentoring. You don't have to have a formal mentoring program, but you can be more thoughtful around encouraging the employees in your company to have somebody that they can rely on and talk to if they need support, if they have questions, especially if you're going to allocate or put somebody on an agile cross collaborative team, maybe ensuring that the people on that team who are like, this is a new experience for, that they have somebody that they can go to talk to and ask questions, or creating mentors within the cross collaborative team. And so Doug and Jeff talked a little bit about how do you create that kind of culture so people can ask questions and be okay with conflict when it arises and see it as an opportunity to find a solution to a problem because there's actual trust within the team. And yes, we talked about, you know, restructuring the allocation of work. Fast-paced work environment doesn't mean drinking out of a fire hose. You can have a fast-paced working environment, but still feel supported in your learning. Okay, you're welcome, Lisa. All right, so that brings us to the end of our presentation. We only have a few more minutes left. I'll just go to the last slide because one of the things I wanted to mention is if you like this information, you're like, I want more. My book, Choose to Be a Leader Others Want to Follow, really goes into these concepts in a lot more depth. We go into what emotional intelligence is, and I share actual testimonials and stories from my participants so we can better illustrate some of the concepts that we discussed today. If you want to engage me in a conversation, please email me at info@SynogapSolutions. You can also go to my website at synogapsolutions.com, and on the first page, there's a button there. It says Discovery Session. Click it. You can book a meeting with me. And I mean, I just love talking with other people who are culture geeks too. And I have a lot of free resources. You can access my micro learning videos through our YouTube channel. I also have a business podcast called Tackle Tuesdays, where we tackle organizational issues that companies are dealing with today. We're developing our season 2 timeline. So if you know somebody you think would be an awesome podcast host, reach out to me. Let me know if that's you. Please let me know. I'd love to talk to you about that. But we also offer online courses. Those are paid, but there's so many other resources like my blog too that you can access, and self-assessments. So if you're an emerging leader or you're a manager or you are a CEO of an organization and you want to assess the culture, the team environment, or if you have what it takes to be a manager, I encourage you to go to the website and you can access all of those self-assessments and resources there.